Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bond, Schoeneck and King, a multi-practice law firm in Rochester with offices across New York State, serving business, healthcare, and educational institutions. Online at bsk.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made in the town of Brighton a couple of months ago. Real estate broker Mark Hyeok joined us on Connections last month to talk about the state of the market, and he told us about a 1,500 square foot house in Brighton, which was listed for sale at $425,000. It sold for $675,000. Now, that is not exactly the norm. $250,000 over the asking price is not common, but for years now, houses in this market have sold pretty consistently well above asking price. It has not been uncommon to see $100,000 over the asking price in the recent years in this market. And now comes new research into what that might mean for the buyers, and it's not necessarily good news. Dr. Steve Choi at RIT researched 14 million transactions across 30 states over a number of years. His findings were published in The Conversation, Fortune, and Choi described a kind of winner's curse. When buyers are pushed by competition and optimism and they overbid, they wind up more likely to default on their mortgages, and they don't always get the return that they're looking for. Dr. Choi agreed to talk to us about the research and his methods here, about what it says and what we can understand about what it means to overbid on a house. We'll talk about the data from Rochester and the Finger Lakes. We'll take a look at the current state of the market. If you've ever wondered just how far you should go when you're bidding on a house, this might be a valuable conversation to you. And I understand what we're talking about are generalities. It is not every buyer, it's not every situation, but I do think the data is informative, especially with what's been happening in this market in recent years. And I want to welcome Dr. Steve Choi, who's an assistant professor of real estate finance in the Saunders College of Business at RIT. He's a real estate economist. Welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And welcome as well to Don Simonetti Jr. Don's president of the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
And Tysharda Johnson-Thomas, who's a real estate broker, an author, motivational speaker. Welcome back to the program to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Evan, for having me.
It's great to have all of you. Listeners, if you want to join the program as we talk about, if you're on the market to buy, to sell, if you've been thinking about it, if you've wondered if you've missed the hottest part of the market, if you're thinking, it's a forever house, so overbidding, it's fine. Anything you want to talk about, because we're going to hit it all this hour as we talk about the state of the market here and what this research means. It's 844-295-TALK. If you want to call the program, it's toll free. 844-295-8255. 263-WXXI if you call from Rochester, 263-9994. Email the program, connections@wxxi.org. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel on WXXI News, thanks for doing that. Please subscribe there, and you can join the chat there if you like. Dr. Choi, I'll start with you. What convinced you to look at 14 million transactions? I mean, what was the moment that you thought, this research might be valuable here? Were you trying to buy a house yourself? I wonder.
Yeah, so it all started actually when I started moving from Ithaca, New York to Rochester for my first job. So before deciding to go to Rochester, I had a couple of other cities, such as San Diego, among other cities. And I thought to myself, well, how could it be that bad, or how heated the market would be in Rochester? So it was after the fact that I decided to come to Rochester that I started looking at different platforms to see the prices.
How long ago was this, by the way?
This was 2023,
okay,
April, May. So it was about 2 years ago. And I realized that time of market on these properties for home purchases were 2 to 4 days. And particularly something that I really realized that's distinct to Rochester market is in the public remarks where the realtors actually putting in the description of property. It's called delayed negotiations. And I thought to myself, what does that mean? And basically that term was coined to instigate a competition in a sense that if there are a lot of buyers queuing up outside of the house, that you wanted a particular deadline where you collect all the bids and then kind of put on the table at a predetermined date and time. So that really got me thinking, is this something Rochester specific? And, are there a lot of overpayment potentially because of the heightened level of competition that's going on the national level? So me and my sort of former colleague and an advisor at Cornell, and also some of my two co-authors in West Virginia and also UNC Charlotte, we decided to investigate the topic.
That's It's interesting because April of 2023, I mean, maybe our guests across the table can confirm. I don't know if that was maybe the worst single month to be a buyer. I mean, it's been a hard time. Great for sellers. It's great if you have multiple properties and can sell one, because of course, if you have to sell a house, you might have to buy a house. So it's a challenge, but that is a tough time to be entering this market here. Rough time to come into the Rochester market. Did you find that you had to, quote unquote, overbid or pay more than the asking?
Yeah, so one anecdotal episode that I have is that I investigated and found like what would be an ideal home in North Greece. And it was listed, I think, strategically a little bit lower, so around between 300, 320 range. But ultimately, the final list we got the information from my realtor is that it was in the lower 400s. So because we had escalation through about maybe 50 to 60K over, we're willing to kind of go. But at that point, we realized that the possibility of overpayment is going to be really certain, and we didn't want to, we stave off that temptation. So there were a lot of failed bids where I think in sort of my evaluation of the fair value of the house would have been just too much for me and my wife. Yeah.
Okay. And so I know our guests across the table here, Don and Tysharda, are going to have a lot to say about what the current state of the market is. And even if the term overbid is accurate, I mean, certainly what we're talking about is paying beyond the asking price.
Right.
But, bids are bids, and the competition is going to yield one winner. So before we do that, let me just ask you about what your research found. And as I do that, the caveat, of course, is that these are generalizations. 14 million transactions across 30 states over 20 years. So this does not mean, listeners, that if you paid over the asking on the house that you currently own or the house that you're in, it doesn't mean that you're going to default. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get what you want when you sell it. It doesn't mean this is true for everybody. But in general, take me through the findings here, Dr. Choi.
Yeah, absolutely. So the punchline, the two key takeaways is that if you purchase your home in a bidding war, that you're more likely on average to overpay. And by how that, depending on the sort of the area and the time, but in our over 2 decades of the data ranging from 2000 to 2018, over 30 states, we believe it's close to 8%. And that's, assuming that your average holding period is about 6 to 7 years. And the other takeaway is that you're more likely to default on your mortgage. And that's sort of intuitive in a sense that if you overpay, then you're effectively taking larger mortgage. So it might encumber your future cash flows and ability to actually pay off that mortgage. So those are the two takeaways.
All right. So that part didn't surprise me, because anybody who's paying more for something on average than a different cohort is probably going to be stretched. So higher rates of default among bidding war winners versus someone who buys a home without paying beyond the asking price. When you talk about lower or weaker returns on it, I'm going to read a little bit from the piece in Fortune on this. You write, how much of a weaker return? On average, home buyers who won bidding wars saw annual returns that were about 1.3 percentage points lower than those who didn't, we found. We specifically looked at unlevered returns, basically the returns you would get if you bought the home outright with cash without factoring in a mortgage. And then you go on to make it another interesting point, because I think a lot of people hearing this are going, yeah, but if it's a forever house, it's a forever house. I mean, if you got to overpay, get the house that you want. You write, we found that home buyers who purchase after a bidding war are also faster to resell. This suggests that overpayment is based less on enduring affection and more on bidding war fever. So the return time or the time to sell, you said 67 years, is that right, on average?
Yeah, so the average holding period is about 6 to 7 years. Okay. So, it's about, yes, correct.
Okay,
yeah.
So 6 to 7 years. And I'm sure there are people who feel like, well, I bought a forever home. It's worth it to me. But in general, that's a psychological feeling. What would you say about trying to mitigate that sense that I'll pay anything to get a forever home versus realizing there is kind of in your phrase, a bidding war fever, an element to getting pulled into something and not wanting to lose?
Right. So I think the distinction is that if you have the enduring affection for the property, then you might classify that as not overpayment, right? Because you love that house. It was a rational decision. They had a Viking fridge. You wanted to be in that property. It makes sense. But our test, our paper shows that, in fact, if it were the case, predominantly the case, then you will see these people holding longer because they bought it for their enduring love. But our paper shows that, in fact, they are on average two months or more holding, shorter period.
They sell it faster.
Yeah, sell it faster. So that kind of shows us, okay, maybe it isn't exactly the enduring love, but maybe it is the heated sort of emotion. Maybe that's sort of the, not necessarily the entire rationality machinery going into making that decision.
I play poker with people like that. I enjoy playing poker with people. I know that they're not going to fold. I know that no matter what cards they hold, they're in it to the end. And I don't mean to make light of it because I know these are big decisions for people. But I think one more important point here is they might be thinking, okay, but the market is changing. It feels like an overbid, but I will get a return on this. I'll be able to sell this in 5 years or 10 or 20. And what your research is finding is that when they resell, they're getting less of a return, right?
Right. So the assumption on the overpayment is that when you make a subsequent resale on the property, that the value will revert back to its more or less a fair value. So the idea is that the market's going to kind of wash out the irrationality. Things will cool down, and it will revert back to the fair price. So at that point, then because of realized annual returns lower, that you're essentially comparing that resale value being lower. So there is a recent Redfin article about selling at a loss. So if you compare all the group of home buyers post-pandemic who bought in a bidding war frenzy, that they might be at risk of selling at a loss if the housing price cools down a little bit.
Sure, and I mentioned off the top here, again, an anecdote that is not data. This is one house. But when Mark Hyeok on this program said, there's a house in Brighton that just sold for $675 after being listed for $425, I hope they're happy with the house, but I can't imagine in 5, maybe 8 years, if you want to turn around and sell it, that you're going to get $700, $750, $800 for a 1,500 square. That might be the category where you go, you might be taking a loss here. So that's a little bit on the research there. Let me ask our guests who work in this industry. Don Simonetti Jr. first is president of the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors. Any surprises from this research from Dr. Choi, first of all?
Steve and I were talking about this right before the show. Not necessarily a surprise, in as much as I said to him, it's equally fascinating. It can be a little bit frightening, right? Because Ty and I are out in the streets every day. And Ty and I were talking earlier this morning about, and I just said this to a client on Saturday, and this is my modem every time I see a house with a client. Do you feel as though you've seen enough inventory for you to decide that this is the house to take you off the market? Because if the answer is yes, most likely you're going to have to go full bore. And I'm here to satisfy your immediate needs, and that's getting into the house if we can. But I'm also looking to protect your future interests. So when you talk about the future interest idea, default, I've been doing this for 28 years. I remember the short sale days, even in Rochester. It's not something that's not necessarily top of mind, I think, for buyers right now in general, but a really good real estate agent is going to be thinking about the mitigation of the risk more than anything else. Given the inventory that we have right now, right now in Monroe County alone, just Monroe County, we have 596 active pieces of property on the market. In 2018, there were 1,700. So
there is no inventory.
There's no inventory, but working with a professional to guide you through the process. And I think you hit a very key point in terms of the psychological factor. That's where a really seasoned agent that understands the market is going to take the client's mindset away from the psychology of that and understand that even more now in this market, you have to be mindful of the business decision that you're making. Because this, for most people is the largest investment they're going to have.
Yeah, and Don, on that point about what happens in the heat of that moment, Steve was talking about being willing to go 50 or 60K over, but really setting that limit. If you're working with me and I said, look, I can go 50K over. Let's see if we can get it. And we bid the asking, and then it goes up, and it's like, we can keep going. And it gets to 50K over, and then someone comes in at 60K over. Now, I told you a week ago before this process, I go 50K over, that's my limit. Now that it's actually happening, I come to you and I say, okay, I can go 75K over. I can do it. But you know that a week ago I told you, don't let me go more. What are you doing with me? Like, how do you work with me through that moment?
Yeah, my job is to say to you, Evan, $25,000 on this purchase may seem like negligible to you right now, but let's remember where we were a week ago, and that's a huge jump. And candidly speaking, and I say this to clients all the time, I don't get paid to say this to you, but now we're teetering into the negative return on your investment standpoint. And I really feel as though the emotional quotient is overweighing the practicality of the decision that you need to make.
You tell people this.
150%. I said it to a client, 3 clients on Saturday. I was out showing property with 3 different clients, and they were ready to go. And I'm like, this is not the house.
They were the people going, I'm not losing this, I'm not folding.
This is not the house to make that kind of a leap. There's a difference between making an investment and making a leap. And the leap is a combination of the faith that you have with your realtor, right? And then the psychology and the desire and the emotional aspect of wanting to be in that house. And the low inventory just spurs that even more. I will also try to avoid having my clients go to an open house. I would prefer they go with me, because then they're victim to everyone else wanting to be in that house. And it just drives that emotional quotient up even more.
Well, before I turn to Ty, let me just ask Dr. Choi, that open house mentality can get really hot and competitive. It's almost like we have to train ourselves with a little bit of psychology before we start this process so we don't get pulled into that. What do you think?
I think that's very important. So on personal note, so if you have a very coveted neighborhood with good school districts, you will see similar cars parked outside on that open house. And I think, Ty and Don can attest to that. And the idea is that you'll see the same couple potentially, in similar sort of background, and you get to see them, and kind of that can instigate your sense of insecurity. What if this house or the next house, there is no, especially when the inventory is low. So I think sort of mental prep that you talked about, Evan, which is, hey, you know what? I might see a lot of similar faces, similar babies who's coming to these open houses, but you gotta make your hard stop at some point, and that's sort of mental prep that I think good agents like Don and my agent also did that to me. Like, he said, look into your eyes. I cannot tell you to buy above this X price, and that I think that's good agents, like Don and Ty would do that. So.
Well, Tysharda Johnson-Thomas, any surprise in some of this data, the research that Dr. Choi talks about?
Evan, no surprise at all. I think that, when we're talking about first-time home buyers versus this is going to be their forever home, it completely changes the game. So for our first-time home buyers, we're always reminding them of their why. This is your first home. It is a starter home. It's not about impressing. It's not about keeping up with the Joneses. It's about making your first investment, because the very first home is going to be it's going to catapult you into your future investments. So as a real estate broker in Rochester, I know that Don and I, we want to walk into Wegmans and see someone and they're still happy about their first investment. We didn't steer them in the wrong direction. And so
they're not avoiding us.
They're not avoiding us going down the bread aisle. But so your first home, it is what is going to catapult you into those future investments. And we want them to come back and buy an additional home, when they're ready. And if they've purchased that first home incorrectly, and I think it always goes back to your team. When you that very first moment that you receive that pre-approval, I would always ask, and I'm a little out the game. I've been doing some other things in real estate lately, but the first thing I ask when they come back with a pre-approval is, oh, okay, you have a $350,000 pre-approval. Do you want your mortgage to be $3,500? What? No, absolutely not. Well, did you talk to the loan officer about what you were comfortable at? I've been told maybe 3 times in my life, if you sell the house for more, that increases your commission. I, again, do not worry about my commission. I worry about relationships with people.
Right.
We live here in Rochester, and I worry about sleeping at night. So starting that with that team, your loan officer, your realtor, your realtor is your mouthpiece. They're the ones who are going to help you with making that proper decision. So the first thing your realtor is going to do, hopefully, is look at the comps in the area, right? Okay, the comps are showing this, but I see that there was a home that did sell for $465, so you can feel comfortable in escalating at least up to the $420.
Right.
I'm not going to allow someone to make a hasty decision in the midst of it. I'm always going back to their why, like Don said, looking in their eyes. Well, last week you told me this. Last week, you also said that your mom was coming to live with you and you needed a first floor bedroom. Now you saw this house and your head is spun around and you just want to throw your first 3 born children, So we always go back to the why. We always bring them back to the place that we started and help them make the proper decision.
Well, and there's one more aspect of this before I open up to some listener feedback, as we're talking about the state of the housing market and some new research that comes from Dr. Steve Choi at RIT, a real estate economist who looked at a wide range with his colleagues. He and his colleagues looked at 14 million transactions, 30 states over 20 years, trying to find out what happens when people overpay significantly or get into bidding wars and go way above asking. And what he found was higher levels of default, lower rates of return when they want to resell. The forever houses are not as forever as people tend to think. So again, we're not saying anything about you. We're not saying anything about any individual. We're talking about what the data is telling us.
Right.
And I'm going to open it up to listener comments about the state of the market in a moment. But I think Rochester is its own little animal in this way. So in 2003, I was a babe in the woods who bought my first house. And I remember it was like, well, here's the asking price. Most of the bids are coming in a little below. There's a different time, very different time. It's like, okay, if I go straight to the full asking, I bet you I get it. Seems like a lot, but I can get it for asking. Got it. Over the next 10 to 15 years, the valuation of that house increased incrementally. And, it was a good, quote unquote, investment. It was not hard to sell. It was making a decent return. That's for if you were selling it in 2016. If you're selling it today, it's basically tripled what the 2003 price was. Incredible. It's exploded. That's the story in a lot of different communities all across Rochester. It's some of the Rochester neighborhoods, it's suburbs, it's a lot of Finger Lakes communities. What makes it hard for me to figure out where the limit is this question. What was happening 20 years ago, 15 years ago, was not what was happening in Manhattan or Philly suburbs or other places. Rochester was always, until the last decade, you can get a ton of house for your money. It's underpriced nationally. It's a great place to buy. And people kept saying, well, it's going to catch up eventually. Going to catch up. Well, here we are. There's no inventory, as our guests have said. It's hard to find anything. And prices are up, up, up. So if you bought a house in 2015 for $140,000, which you could get, now, even if you overpaid, even if a house was listed at $130 in 2015, and you bought it for $160, and it felt like a pretty big overpay, now you're getting a ton more. So yeah, you overpaid, but you overpaid at the right time. Now, if you're overpaying, I would be very surprised if we're talking 10 years from now, and the market's up another 50 to 80% or something like that. So if you're the person who paid $250 over asking for that 1,500 square foot house in Brighton, I could be wrong. I'm often wrong. But how do we figure out, Don, when the market goes, okay, we're not going to go up another 100, another 200, another 50%, another 80%, another 100% in the next decade? This last decade feels unusual. And I think it would be silly to think I can keep overbidding, because 10 years from now, if I sell, people will be overbidding anyway. Right. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. I was going to say, if you're going to bid and get it for $200,000 over asking, I hope that you do really like the Viking stove, right? And that's worth it. There is such a psychological aspect to the purchase process right now. And, we do have clients that really feel that this is the house, and it's not that they don't care about the return on their investment, in as much as this is the house for them right now, and they're going to deal with that later. Again, our job is to be mindful, like Ty said, if there are comps in the neighborhood that show a consistent value proposition of increasing year over year over year, and then you look at that 2019 to 2025 and see that there's a property or two or three that are higher than where you're going to end up being, you're making a rational decision, and you're making, hopefully, a data-driven decision. To forecast where we would be, 150%. I could quote you neighborhoods right now in the city of Rochester where I could say to you, after 28 years of being in business, if you're going to buy this house that's on the market for blank and you're going to buy it for Y, I hope you enjoy it, because there's no way that house is going to be Z. There's just no way. So you have to look at, like Ty and I were talking about earlier today, you have to look at what that immediate need is, and a seasoned real estate professional is going to make the decision to advise their client on what the current reality is going to be, what the anticipated value could be based on the trajectory of the comps right now, but also be willing to just continue to stay the course and not make a knee-jerk reaction. That's the thing that is going to continue to spike the market, is the knee-jerk reactions. We can't account, from a generality standpoint, Evan, the people that are just going to, quote-unquote, throw money at a piece of property, A, because they can afford to do so and they don't care about their investment. There are multiple different buyers buying for multiple different reasons. But as a general practice, as a real estate professional, we've really got to find the balance.
I think that's really well said. Also, never take advice from me, listeners, on financial matters, on stock matters. Never, ever. I'm not a licensed anything. So no, don't. I'm just musing, and my musing should mostly be ignored. But what do you think, Ty? For people who think, listen, I can overbid today because this market's been overbid for the last dozen years. And a dozen years from now, if I sell, so there will be somebody overbidding. The market will remain hot. I just worry, as a non-professional, I worry that assumption is a dangerous one for people.
Definitely. Evan, you said something that, you purchased your home in 2003, and I believe that's when I purchased my home. The other thing we need to remember is that interest rates were half of what they are now. They were extremely low. So one of the things that's happening in the market that is kind of holding up our supply. I'm one of those people holding up the supply. Evan, you may be too. Living in a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home. What we're paying for our mortgage is what a 1-bedroom apartment.
Yes, right. That's my story too.
Is going for right now.
There's nothing that is on the market. I mean, like, it's from a different time period.
Yes,
it's like a different lifetime.
Yes,
so you feel like you're stealing almost.
You definitely do, and you are.
Right.
But where are we going to go? Because now we're saying that those homes that we purchased for $250,000, $150,000 are now selling for $400,000 or $500,000, right?
So go ahead and sell, but
where are you going to go?
Somewhere.
Right.
Where are you going to go?
So I've already, told my husband that we're going to just build on. When we can't crawl up the stairs anymore, we can't climb the stairs. We'll just build on. But no, seriously, one of the things that we also need to remember is that, yes, our prices have gone up in Rochester. It is still a great place to buy. We still are not where New York City is. We are still not
Fair.
where California is.
Definitely true.
It's still a great place to buy. It just continues to go back to your team and who is advising you, who you trust for advice. Particularly, a lot of my work has been with first-time home buyers. So I cannot, for the life of me, no matter how many grants, we'll tell them, no matter how many grants you stack on, no matter how many things that you put in place, all of the grants, none of those come until you're at the closing table. That up front is what's going to get you in the door. So you have to stand out. If there are 20 people looking at that house and 20 people putting in similar offers, the other thing that your agent should be doing is calling the listing agent ahead of time. Hey, my buyer has a $250,000 pre-approval. Some people don't like this, but I call it playing in the sandbox nicely with other agents. We need to do more of that. Your agent calls in advance. Hey, my buyer has a VA loan. It's a $250,000. That's their cap. What offer? Can you just tell me? Do you have offers over $250,000?
Right.
Now I'm not putting that buyer through that.
Right, sure.
Waiting overnight, waiting 48 hours.
When it's not going to happen.
When it's not going to happen. We're moving on to that house that they probably can't afford, right?
Yeah.
So it starts with looking at, if they're up to $250,000, we're probably looking at $200,000 or less, $150,000. So we're not even going to those $250,000 homes because their pre-approval is only up to $250,000. So the expectations need to be set ahead of time with your clients as well.
Well, if you're wondering if there's going to be any cooling in the market, last question for Dr. Choi before we turn to some listeners after the break here. I think part of what you wrote for Fortune is that at least nationally, there's a bit of a cooling happening in the housing market. I don't know if that will apply snugly to the Rochester Finger Lakes area. It's a different story if you own multiple properties, because then you could sell a house and then you don't have to buy a house. Having one house, a one-for-one trade, selling a house for a huge return doesn't always help you right now if you have to overpay or pay a lot for another house. But for people who do want to think about selling, is there any evidence that our market is starting to cool in the way that a national market is cooling?
So I think that's a good question and appreciate that. So I think there are 2 points. First is basically what Ty alluded to as an interest rate. So we've seen the Federal Reserve cutting the interest rate and sort of anticipating further cuts. So if the, let's say, 30-year fixed rate mortgage on the Freddie Mac comes down, let's say 100 basis point, I think there's an opportunity for refinancing. So you don't necessarily have to sell, but there's an opportunity for that could significantly save your monthly payments. In terms of cooling down, I think one measure that I think Don and Ty would agree with is days on market. So and then also the public remarks. So something specific about Rochester is the delayed negotiations. So there have been more listings, not predominantly, that says no delayed negotiation, or just simply don't put that term anymore to signal to the buyers that we're going to do kind of, anybody come in and it's kind of sequentially we're going to deal with it. So we kind of see that, but there's also a dormant group of buyers who are waiting for that, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate coming down. So you have this sort of competing forces where, hey, I'm really waiting for that rate to come down, and then there's still people who are locked into the mortgage, where like the tie-in who are paying lower monthly payments, and to go anywhere with the higher payments. So I think the cooling down will be a little bit less to the national standards in terms of the speed at the pace, but we'll see that gradually. But I need to say, with the great inversion to the upstate and Rochester just being a great city, I think there's still a high demand for great homes. Yeah.
So after we take our only break, I've got questions from listeners as we talk about the state of the housing market and the concerns baked into the data about what happens when you really massively overbid or overpay the asking price, and what that means for your future chances of either defaulting or not, getting a good return on your investment in a piece of property, and more here. It's 844-295-TALK. If you want to call the program, 844-295-8255. Tell us about your experience in the adventures in the housing market. You can email the program connections@wxxi.org. We'll read your emails next and the comments on the YouTube chat if you're watching on WXXI News YouTube channel. My guests include Dr. Steve Choi from RIT. He's a real estate economist who's done a lot of work in this area. Tysharda Johnson-Thomas and Don Simonetti Jr. are with us. Ty's a real estate broker, an author, a motivational speaker. Don's president of the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors. And we'll be right back with your feedback next. From WXXI News, I'm Evan Dawson, and this is Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. I'm just stunned for a second because I got a text message. I don't know if I'm allowed to read on the air. So whoever just texted me that privately, tell me if I can read that on the air. I really want to share that story. Okay, so let me get some of your feedback here. Let's start with this. Dallas says, my first house was $93,000. My mortgage was $500 a month. Sold it in 2016, made like $8,000. The people who bought it trashed it. My old neighbor bought it for like $95,000 to flip. The house I bought in 2016 went for $148,000, and Zillow says it's now $275,000. Whoa, from 93 to 275 in 9 years. That's from Dallas. John says the following. John says, we have helped our children purchase 3 homes in 2 years, none at or below asking. This is nothing more than a pricing gimmick, I think, that realtors use by pricing the home below market value with no intention of accepting that price, knowing that it will sell for what it's actually worth or a little more in the end, which is far higher than the lowball list price. If a realtor really prices a home $100,000 or more, less than it actually sells for, then they are probably ill-informed as to what the true value of that home actually is. We've lived it. It is icky. Okay, Don, I'm going to start with you. What would you say to John?
Of course you're going to start with me. It's not a gimmick. It's a reality. We were talking about the psychology of things, right? Again, doing transactions for a number of years, the first thing that I always ask a seller is, Evan, in a perfect world, what would you hope to get for the house? Because I need to understand if you're tied to a tether or you're floating in air without any reality. I asked that question back when the average list price to sale price ratio on a good house was, if you could get 95% of your asking price, that was phenomenal. I'm looking at the data, however, right? And if you said to me, I want to get X, and I felt that that number was appropriate given the market and not just the recently sold, but I go back to under contract and pending. And as a listing agent, I'm going to ask the other listing agents, how many offers did you get? How did you do on list price to sale price ratio? So that I can then educate my seller, because all we're doing is tracking and tapping into buyer expectation and behavior. So if a buyer in our market is working with an agent and they understand that in order to prevail, they have to be upwards of 12 to 15% over asking price, I'm not going to price it where I think it's going to sell, because then no one's going to come to the house. I'm going to price it at a number where I think an astute buyer, after going through house after house after house, is going to look at that list price and they're going to understand that the expectation is that it's going to be a certain number over. So it's not a gimmick in as much as it's interpreting data and pushing it back into the marketplace.
Okay, anything you want to add, Ty?
Oh, my goodness. Don, he's just amazing. Okay.
You just want to echo what Don
That's what I
said?
want to echo what Don said, because, he also stated that just going that extra mile, calling agents in the area who have either sold homes or currently have homes listed that are similar to the house that you're getting ready to offer on.
I would say that is one of the only positives about coming out of the pandemic.
Yes.
Pre-pandemic, you call a listing agent that's pending and you'd ask, how did you do? Close to the vest. I'm not sharing that until it closes. I'm sorry. As a result of the pandemic, when we're all kind of trying to get ourselves out of this quagmire that we're in, agents are being much more cooperative with other agents in terms of information, and it's very, very helpful when you're trying to educate your client.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. John, thank you for the email. So I told the story of what Mark Seawick told us about a house listed at 425 sells for 675. The person who owns that house is a regular listener and just sent me a little more info. I'm not going to read their name, but it was listed at 424.9, and the listener says we actually sold for 680, and we could have gotten 700 for it if we wanted to be scoundrels. It's nuts. So this is where I go. Okay, 424.9. By the way, three beds, 2 baths. 424.9. And the new owner paid 680. I can't make any predictions. Don't listen to my advice. I'm just going to tell you what a layperson's view. I cannot believe they're going to sell that for 750 or more, or 700 or 800 in 10 years. But maybe that's where we're going. I don't know. I mean, Dr. Choi, you're probably going to caution me. You're the expert. I'm not. I should probably not predict where we're going, I guess.
Right, and I
yes,
no,
exactly.
I think you have deep insights into these the housing markets and particularly local markets, and thanks to the listener who gave that information. One thing is that the quality changes. So maybe the people who are overpaying are also willing to invest their time to ramp up their kitchen or make changes. So if the quality of the property adjusts over time and adds value, maybe that's sort of the niche that person is looking for. So like we said, not everybody's suffering from the winner's curse or overpayment or mortgage default, but I think it all depends on the mindset, right? So if I bought it that much over the asking, then what are some of the necessary the sweat equity in the future that I would need to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And that seems like a lot of sweat equity.
A lot.
A lot. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not just a kitchen.
Have you seen 250 over asking with
Yes.
anything but commonly?
No, God, no.
Okay.
There was one I showed. Very interesting perspective. I work with people that come into town with a local company, and they come from much larger areas. And their expectation in terms of price point is staggeringly different in terms of what we offer. We don't have to talk about the taxes, but that's another conversation. But in terms of the purchase price, they're willing to throw more money than a local buyer might because they're not initially as astute to the local market as a local buyer might be if they're working with the right realtor. Again, my job is to make sure that they understand what's going on. If you're going to buy something in Pittsford that was on the market 6 months ago and it was built in 1971 and nothing was done to that property, but this buyer has a particular need, desire, want, and affordability to make it theirs, to your point, and retrofit it to a 2026 dynamic, they're going to be here for 3 to 5 years, and they overpaid slightly, but they're going to do very well on the return because I can track that data.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let me get Will in Rochester on the phone. Hey, Will, go ahead.
Hey, Evan, how you doing?
Good, sir.
So I just had a quick comment. So I'm kind of shopping for houses myself right now, and I've read some stuff that says that Rochester is like one of the hottest housing markets in the country right now. I think I read that prices have gone up like 25% in the past 2 years. And I don't know if this is true, which is why I wanted to ask your expert panel. I've heard that a lot of this inflation has kind of been driven by like wealthy individuals from outside the state individuals or entities have been buying up a lot of like residential properties and basically driving up the prices and renting them out because a lot of these people or entities can afford to buy in cash over asking price. And I mean, just like a regular working guy like me, we can't possibly compete with that. And you've got people buying up, entire blocks of houses, and it's driving out the working people of Rochester who actually need places to live, and affordably so. And I'll take my response off air.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Will, thank you for that phone call. So let's go around the table. A lot of nodding here. Ty, you want to start?
Yes. So that's one of the one of the reasons that Governor Hochul is working on the law that will allow homes to be on the market for a certain period of time, open to buyers in the area before it reaches those investors. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. You know, when we're looking at housing supply, a lot of our local organizations are looking to purchase those homes so that they can renovate them and turn them back over to actual home buyers in the area. So thank you for bringing that up, because that is one of the reasons that the prices are being driven up. And it's not only those out-of-town investors or large companies. There's also people in Rochester that have money to throw, like Don said.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Don?
Yeah, just very quickly. Again, when you're talking to a buyer, you need to make sure that the buyer understands with whom they're competing. And it may not just be a first-time home buyer. I showed a ranch to someone over the weekend, and I said, look, you're competing with first-time home buyers, but you're also competing with people who are going to downsize and want to stay in this area or need to stay in this area. And you're going to be competing with investors who have a better scale of equity to make an investment and then flip it. To your point, Steve, they're going to flip it, and in maybe a year or two, they're going to make a gain that my client may not necessarily be able to make the gain in 5 years, because he's got to bid higher than he can afford in order to do that. And I'm just not going to let that happen.
Yeah, Dr. Choi, I understand Will's frustration.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that feeling that the market sort of starts to feel stacked against you when you consider the outside investors and all the different forces against, working class home buyers.
Yeah, and I think that's where also the financing is important. So there are local and community banks that look at this bidding frenzy, or a lot of external buyers coming into the local Rochester market, where community banks kind of provide this line of credit where that can be viewed as maybe all cash, lender-backed cash offers, because all these other sort of external or big-scaled companies do have the equity to just pile on the cash. So I think the financing side is also another important side of the equation that could help the working class, or also just the median home buyers in Rochester, who can bring, let's say, a piece of paper that says, hey, it's just as good as cash offer, that I can compete with these big guys, because then I can get into the arena of competition where I can say, hey, I'm going to waive some of the contingencies here and there to be able to have that chance.
All right, a lot of listener feedback. Let's keep it moving as fast as we can. Judy in Brighton. Hey, Judy, go ahead.
Hi, yes. And I'll take my answer off the air. I'm just curious, for people who have invested a lot in solar and, the renewables like the electric car charger and all that, will they ever get their money back, or does it make your house more or less sellable? And I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you.
Great question, Judy. So solar and EV chargers, helpful or hurtful for selling, Don?
Certainly helpful. It's not going to be hurtful. Anything that a seller can add to the aesthetic value and perception of value that a buyer may have, whether it's traditional value and perception, or it's more current or niche, absolutely.
I don't have a fully electric car. I would like one in the future. Judy, if your house is one I'm looking at and it's got an EV charger, I'm more likely to want it.
Of course.
And if I didn't want it, I wouldn't be put off by it being there. So,
correct.
Okay. So can only help you, Judy, and I hope that's good news for you. Thank you for the phone call. On we go. Charlie says, is it my imagination, or are houses in the suburbs not appreciating nearly as quickly as those in the East Avenue, Park Avenue area? I've noticed where I live near Powder Mill Park, houses sit for a while before they sell, and they do go over the asking price, but not nearly as much as a percentage as the areas I just mentioned. What would explain that? Or is it true? It's a good question from Charlie. I don't know. Don, are the suburbs struggling compared to the hot Rochester neighborhoods?
No.
Okay, that's
not
his
at all.
Imagination.
No, it's just not reality. I don't know about anything else. Right now in Pittsford, there are 16 properties on the market between $180,000 and $400,000. So the inventory is exceptionally low.
Okay, yeah. So, Charlie, probably just a small sample size that you're looking at. Yeah. Nothing more than that. Ariel says, you can tell when a house goes up for sale in my neighborhood in Parrington before the sign even goes up on the lawn, because there will be a line of cars down the street of potential buyers scoping it out. The most recent one went 150 over asking. It's mind-boggling. And Ariel continues, just 150 over seems like a lot. So It's a good place to close. That's a lot over, but that's not all that uncommon still done.
It's not. Again, when the average list price to sale price ratio is 15% over asking price, 150 might be on the north end of that. But again, it depends on price point. The staggering nature of that 150 depends on the price point.
Yeah.
If you're talking about 250 up to 400, that's staggering. 450 up to 6, still staggering, but it's more commensurate with the price range in that particular town.
30 seconds. What do you want to leave with listeners, Ty?
Yes. Know what your level of comfortability is. No matter what, try not to stray from that. It's easier to say than to actually do, but have a great team behind you.
Well, I think both of our guests who do this have really pushed the idea that you got to trust your team. Yeah. And if they want future customers, they want you to say nice things about them. So build that relationship. Dr. Choi, as we close here, about 40 seconds, what do you want to leave with listeners?
I think being optimistic is great, but always, err on the side of caution to be the most optimistic in the room when you are in the housing bidding war, because that could lead to some of the potential adverse financial consequences.
Thank you for sharing your research. Don, final thoughts from you for listeners?
Stay the course with the market. Don't get discouraged. Trust your professional and stay the course.
Don Simonetti Jr. is president of the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors. This is an ongoing subject that's a big one for our listeners. Come back sometime.
I'd love to.
Thank you very much,
Thank you for having me.
Tysharda Johnson-Thomas, great to have you back here.
Thank you, Evan.
Same deal. Come on back anytime. And Dr. Steve Choi, who is a professor of real estate finance at the Saunders College of Business at RIT. He's a real estate economist. We're going to link to some of his work in our show notes if you want to share them, because this is not just a Rochester story. His work looked at 14 million transactions over 30 states. And it wasn't just him. He has colleagues, but he's the only one on the show. Steve, thank you for making time. It's great meeting you.
Thank you so much, Evan. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
More Connections coming up in just a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.